Some new and terrifying leaked Tyranid rules have reared their head from the latest White Dwarf, a Nidzilla army of Renown that gives you a 5+ invul save and -1 damage for every single monster. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we have some very interesting leaked 40k rules indeed. A brand new army of Renown called the Stampede for Tyranids, which, if it is what it appears to be, does very much look like it could be an incredibly competitive way to play Tyranids going forward. The bugs were already having a bit of a resurgence with all their Warzone Octarius stuff, certainly pushing their way towards the top of tournaments, and this looks like it could take them to the next level, perhaps one of the scarier armies in all of 40k. It does seem like a really fun formation though. Tyranid monster lists haven't really been a top dog thing for quite a long time, and it would be really cool to see whole hosts of Carnifexes being competitive on the table once more. In brief, this formation is called the Tyranid Stampede. It appears to be a new army of Renown, and it's recently been leaked from the December issue of White Dwarf on Reddit. I will link it down in the video description. It's part of a rule series called Flashpoint Octarius, a series of campaign rules set in the Octarius sector, so Tyranids versus Orcs versus Imperium. This formation is really focusing on the big bugs, so no swarms or horde models allowed, and we'll get onto the exact restrictions in just a second. On the face of it though, it looks very powerful indeed, though for me I think there still is a bit of a question mark as to whether or not it's actually going to be allowed to be used in matched play. So far leaked to the internet we have all of the rules for the actual army of Renown, but we don't really have the supporting text section of it, the one that hopefully just says yes, you can use this in any Tyranid army. I do know that at least for some rules like this in the past, they have gone down the line of saying you can only use these in the Octarius sector missions. These rules really seem to have been making a big stir on the internet. That Reddit thread has something like 250 odd comments on it, but so far nowhere that I've seen has actually commented on whether or not it can definitely be run for matched play. Maybe there's been further leaks that I don't know about, and certainly if anyone does have the front rules page for the section, please let me know down in the comments. Hopefully if we do find a bit more info about it, then I'll post a pinned comment down below saying if it definitely can or can't be used for matched play. Personally, I'm certainly all for Nidzilla getting a much needed boost in matched, but I must admit these rules do seem ridiculously strong. And also, if this is to become the competitive face of Tyranids, I'm not sure that it being in a White Dwarf is really the best place for it. It just seems like something that new Tyranid players are likely to struggle to get hold of. In any case, all that aside, let's just jump straight into the rules now, and talk about the brutal power that this Stampede can unleash. As with all armies of Renown, you do get restrictions and benefits. The restrictions for this one are mainly that you can't take any swarm units, and you can't take models with fewer than 2 wounds. For Tyranids, that does lock out quite a lot of competitive options. No Ripper swarms for pop-up cheap screening, no big blobs of Gene Stealers rushing the enemy, and no huge units of Termagants with Devourers frying the enemy infantry with 180 strength 4 shots. Some 1-wound infantry will certainly be missed, just for simple grunt work, actions and screening. As well as that, you must take at least as many monster tag units as non-monster units, so you couldn't just use this to spam nothing but Tyranid warriors and hive guarding characters. You need to have a whole load of monster data sheets mixed in as well. It still does allow you to field a decent amount of big heavy infantry too though. Just a few cheap Carnifexes and things could allow you to field some hefty squads of Tyranid warriors. Finally, the entire army must be from the same hive fleet, so no mixing things like Leviathan and Kronos, and what's more, the units never gain a hive fleet adaptation, though they still do get to keep the keyword. So basically Leviathan Tyranids aren't getting that 6+ feel no pain they normally have, though to be honest I think this isn't the worst of the downsides, as the benefits that the monsters get are stronger than any single one hive fleet benefit by quite a margin I think. Keeping the keyword is pretty useful as well though. It means that you can still do things like use the Leviathan stratagems and warlord traits, some of which are insanely strong. So those are the downsides and restrictions, but what are the benefits then? Firstly, you gain access to the Stampede warlord traits, stratagems and psychic powers, all of which have some tasty morsels in. Secondly, and the rule that just brings the ridiculous power to this formation, are that monster units all gain a trio of really helpful special rules. First up, every monster gains a 5+ invul save, so they're going to be far more resistant to high AP anti-tank weapons. They all gain -1 damage, like their dreadnoughts. That's going to ruin the day of any army that's relying on mass damage 2 weapons to try and down your big bugs. And finally, as if that weren't enough, the monsters also get a count towards capturing objectives. They count as the number of models as they have wounds remaining. That also is really very nice. Say you've got a massive 18 wound hybrid duel or something. Just park it on an objective, and then you count as having a massive 18 model unit on it. That objective isn't going to be captured by anything that doesn't have OBSEC, and you could have some OBSEC of your own on it as well, maybe with a Tyranid warrior or two. Basically, if you have any Tyranid monster, then they're going to absolutely love this formation. Finally, for all the non-monster units, things like Tyranid warriors or Hive Guard for example, they all gain a 5+ invul save, though again that is at the expense of their Hive Fleet adaptation. I really wouldn't underestimate this either. Hive Fleet adaptations aren't really the strongest version of Chapter Tactics in 40k right now, and I'd argue that getting a 5+ invul save on some of these units could easily be better than getting whatever they would have got otherwise. I think it's particularly good for things with fairly poor armor saves, things like Hive Guard or Warriors. They're just going to become a right nuisance to shift, as the big multi-damage weapons that are usually quite good at dealing with them usually tend to be quite high AP and are not going to like hitting this. Overall, the formation as it stands just looks like a massive win for Tyranids. If, as I said, this is indeed for match play and isn't locked to the Octarius campaign missions, then basically if you had any Tyranid monster, it's now become far more efficient. It's perhaps also going to be the best formation for also running mass Tyranid warriors, and you can still spam Hive Guard if you want to. Just off the face of this looks like an absolutely top tier army, if it is indeed allowed in competitive play. It doesn't end there though, as there's quite a lot of further rules to support the formation. First up, there's a trio of Warlord traits, quite helpful for Tyranids, as aside from the very good Leviathan ones, they don't have all that many strong ones I think. First up, there's a 6-inch aura of exploding 6s to hit in melee. As Tyranids don't have the core keyword, that just affects everything, whether it's a monster or a character, and that one's going to be particularly powerful on anything that hits on a 4+. It's going to be a pretty massive damage increase, and it should affect the actual character that's bearing it itself. The only restriction for this is that it does have to target monsters, so it can work on character monsters, but it couldn't work on things like Tyranid warriors or Broodlords for example. I think it's a pretty powerful choice for something like a Hive Tyrant though, making its own melee vastly more dangerous, as well as what it's leading into the fight. Next up is a 3-inch debuff aura, -1 for enemy units in that range to hit in melee, and also -1 for combat attrition. Not terrible, but I think it's inferior to the top one. And then finally we have an extra D3 attacks in melee once per turn. Certainly a really nice one for turning your Hive Tyrant into a far more fighty little critter. And I think it's fairly balanced versus the first one with the exploding 6s. This one will give a stronger buff to the actual Hive Tyrant itself, but it only affects the one model and doesn't have the capability of affecting models nearby. In any case, two really good ones there. Though if you are playing Leviathan, you would have to weigh them up against the two really good ones from that subcodex. Next up we come to stratagems, and we have 7 here. A lot of them really in keeping with the Tyranid maxim of a lot of their stratagems just dealing loads of more extra damage. First up, 2 command points for Thunderous Impact. You use this if one of your monsters charges an enemy monster or vehicle. It's a fairly pricey one, and your monster can only target that vehicle, but you get the huge buffs of +1 to hit, wound and damage rolls. It's perhaps particularly relevant if you're targeting anything really tough, maybe something that's tougher than you are strong. And I think maybe it's going to be best used if it's going to make the difference between your monster killing the enemy dead, or maybe giving them a chance to strike back and you getting killed in return. For 1 command point we have Terrifying Charge. A charging monster gives one enemy unit that's within engagement range -3 leadership. That's a pretty hefty debuff just to hand out for 1 command point. If your opponent has big powerful models that are actually at risk of running away, that could be a really easy one to use. Next up, for 1 or 2 command points we have Unbreakable Chitin, and this one's basically a transhuman physiology rule. Wound rolls of 1 to 3 will always fail against this target, irrespective of modifiers or other special rules. It's 1 command point for most small things, and then 2 command points if there's either 5 or more models in the unit, or the target is a monster with 10 or more wounds. This one's a really powerful defensive trick to have in the arsenal, and again is going to be most important on things that you absolutely want to survive till the next turn. I could imagine it being pretty handy on really big units of Tyranid warriors in the midfield. Transhuman plus 5+ invul saves are going to make them really annoying to shift, or maybe just on a toughness 7 monster that's about to get targeted by a whole load of anti-tank weapons. For 2 command points, Death Surge allows you to target a non-character monster to fight in death on its top bracket, and this one bucks the trend of a fair few similar rules, meaning that you get to make use of this whether or not your monster has already fought in the fight phase, meaning that this could be a way to fight twice if your monster is killed by enemy attacks. Again, another way to trade command points into a lot more damage. Some Tyranid monsters can genuinely wipe out squads with a single round of combat, so it might really surprise some hefty enemy elites that have just brought them down. For 1 command point we have Breaking Through, which might just be one of the most undercosted stratagems out of this whole list I think. When a monster charges a unit, this is a really easy way to deal out a ton of mortal wounds to infantry. Once your monster has made a successful charge, you select one enemy model in that unit, and then you deal a number of mortal wounds to the model's unit. You count the number of wounds that your monster has, roll 1 dice for every one that it has remaining, and then you have a chance to deal mortal wounds comparing your strength and toughness. If the strength is greater, you get them on a 3+, if your strength is the same, you get them on a 4+, and if your strength is less, then you get them on a 5+. This allows you to generate mortal wounds up to a maximum of 6 mortal wounds on your target. I think the upshot of this is that if you charge with a reasonable amount of mortal wounds less, and you're targeting virtually any sort of infantry, you're almost certainly going to just deal a flat 6 mortal wounds for 1 command point. That is just ridiculously efficient, and it's going to be rewarding monsters for what they want to do anyway. You could even have this turn a basically non-combat monster into a murderous melee one, say charging in something like an Exocrine or a Turvagon, and they've got a very good chance of dealing 6 mortal wounds as well as whatever else they were doing. This really seems like one of the best Tyranid damage buffs out there, and will be one to consider every single time you charge a unit. Finally, we've got a couple of ones from Tyranid warriors. The first one is Rapid Adaptation for 1 CP. You use this at the start of the battle, and you upgrade a Tyranid warrior squad to weapon skill 2+ and ballistic skill 3+. You can use it twice in a strike force game. This just seems another piece in the puzzle in making big Tyranid warrior units really efficient. It means that in this formation, you can have 1 command point to make them hit extra hard in melee and shoot a bit better. They'll have that innate 5+ invul save, and they also have access to a transhuman physiology stratagem. I could easily see big units of Tyranid warriors being a real terror in the middle of the table with this. It's 153 points for 9 just with basic loadouts, and you could pile a whole ton of ridiculously durable wounds onto the centre board with that, but you'd certainly happily chew through any light infantry that got within range. The other one for warriors is 1 or 2 command points for enhanced brain functions. This one allows Tyranid warriors to shoot in close combat as if they were vehicles with the big guns never tire rule. It's 1 command point for 5 or fewer models, or 2 command points for more than this. Again, I think this one's kind of fun to have in the bag. I guess between this and Rapid Adaptation, you could perhaps justify some Death Spitter armed warriors. I guess it's easier to justify some shooter units if you know they're still going to get to fire if they're tagged. Overall, a lot of these look very good indeed. Maybe a few of them a little bit borderline for how many command points they cost. In particular, I think Breaking Through seems ridiculously powerful for 1 CP. I'm sure that Rapid Adaptation will get used on warriors, and Death Surge, Unbreakable Chitin, and Thunderous Impact all seem like pretty handy tricks to have in the bag. Finally, for the new rules for the formation, there's a trio of psychic powers with the mass convergence discipline. The first one's Synaptic Barrier, a nice simple warp charge 6-1 with 18-inch range, and 1 model gains a 4+ invul save. This one's simple and effective. 1 model in your army is going to get tougher to gun down, and it can be something truly huge, something like a Harridan, a Barbed or Scythed Hierodule, or maybe a Dimacaron. You could even use this on something truly massive like a Hierophant perhaps. It certainly seems that if you do want to make use of the biggest bug around, then this is a no-brainer psychic power. I would bear in mind though that everything will have a 5+ invul save already, so this is only improving that by 1 pip. Next there's Aggressive Surge, Warp Charge 6 and 18 inches. Again this targets 1 single model, and it gets plus D3 attacks. Again a pretty powerful psychic power that's going to translate into direct effect on the battlefield. You can just throw this towards one of your units that's charging each turn, preferably something with massive damage, maybe something like a Dimacaron, Hierodule or a Hive Tyrant. Perhaps it could be an interesting one to stack with that Warlord trait that also gives you D3 attacks. Maybe combine the two on a fighty Hive Tyrant with a combat relic of some sort, and you've got a brutally efficient death machine, and one that should be even harder to take out with the -1 damage that the formation gives. Finally, we've got Infused Energies, Warp Charge 6 and 18-inch range, and this one's another very nice melee buff, allowing to reroll hits in melee for any non-synapse units. It could be pretty nice on any weapon skill 4+ units around, maybe Carnifexes, though I guess you might just be better off targeting something truly massive again. Again, a lot of the big Forge World critters come to mind. Finally, I thought we could just talk through a few powerful units that might make use of these rules, again presuming that this is indeed a match play section, which still at this point of speaking isn't confirmed. Generally, if you've got a monster, it's going to get hugely more efficient with this. Maybe the best beneficiaries are the ones that don't have an invul save already, so aren't costed to have one factored in. This is the sort of buff that is exactly what Carnifexes wanted. Massively tougher and a bit better on objectives to boot. It's quite nice to see one of the most iconic Tyranid units have the option of being scary again. I think Exocrines would also quite like all aspects of this, They might also make particularly good objective campers, maybe paired with a really cheap unit of Tyranid warriors to do some obsecking. And I think Hive Tyrants are looking really quite interesting as well. They don't care about the invul, but the -1 damage is again exactly what they wanted. Perhaps their main issue is being directly targetable, so you have the potential for them being shot down before they take good effect. You could create some truly murderous characters with the plus 2d3 attacks thing, particularly in combination with either a relic or maybe that murderous sized bioweapon adaptation. Still though, if this does become a mainstream way to run Tyranids, I feel like it again might reward the big Forge World beasties more than the Codex ones. When Tyranids with Dimacarons were seeing some tournament success, they were often being paired with things like barbed and scythed Hyradules, which bring a crazy amount of wounds to the table, and again will love having the 5+ invul and -1 damage. They're pretty decently durable just in their own points, never mind in this formation. The Harridan is also looking sickeningly powerful with this too. It's already ridiculously difficult to take out, that's going to get even worse with a 5+ invul base and a 4+ invul with a psychic power. You really could make the thing nigh unkillable with 34 wounds at toughness 8, -1 damage, a 4+ invul, and maybe even a 5+ feel no pain from Catalyst. That could just tank virtually an entire army's shooting for at least a couple of turns, I think. With that many wounds, whatever you charge, you're likely to be dealing 6 mortal wounds for just that one command point, so that's going to make it extra dangerous both in shooting and in fighting. Finally, there's all the multi-wound infantry here. Tyranid warriors will love the 5+ invul and hitting on 2s in melee. I think Raveners and Venomthropes could both be worth a second look as well. They only save on 5s at the moment, so this buff makes them crazily more tough, and Venomthropes in particular could be ranked up into a big unit, and then give all of your stacked incredibly tough monsters even more durability by making them -1 to hit at range. Finally, and perhaps most concerningly, it still seems that you could take Leviathan buffed Hiveguard with this. A bit of a terror of the entire 40k meta at the moment with their crazy buffed indirect shooting, and what's more, they're even better than normal because they get a 5+ invul. They'll survive a bit more of whatever opportunistic shooting or combat you can get into them, and tank any high AP ignores line of sight fire. So anyway, these rules look incredibly interesting. Sorry I've had to caveat quite so much throughout the course of this video. I just don't want to sensationalize and say that this is going to be the new powerful way to play Tyranids if we don't know 100% that it can be used in matched. As I said, I'll try and post a pinned comment down below with an update, if and when I do get firm clarification one way or the other. In any case, I look forward to hearing what you have to say about the formation. If you're a Tyranid player, would this be getting your Carnifexes back on the table? Let me know down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k content coming, with new videos out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the things on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early each week, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways, with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.